Good evening to you. Mia Gradney here in the KHOU 11 newsroom, along with Marcelino Benito tonight with a preview to a very special story. We're going to take an intimate look at Alzheimer's disease, specifically in the Hispanic community. It's the most prevalent dementia, resulting in problems with memory, thinking, behavior, and really so much more. Marcelino, I know this story is very personal to you.
Extremely personal, Mia. As you know, my mom passed away from Alzheimer's in April of this year, and that was a huge loss for me. As many of our viewers know, they've been following along on my own grief journey, even taking time off of work, to deal with what was going on emotionally and mentally inside me, and I'm doing better. But it was during one of those low points during my time off that I started thinking, what can I do to sort of turn what I was feeling into something positive, to give it some purpose? And that's how the idea for this story came about. My mom died from Alzheimer's, and in that period of time we felt so alone dealing with it for years, not knowing that there were resources out there. And that this was actually impacting so many people. We're actually not alone. There's so many people out there.
Well, I think so many people, are used to hearing about people dying from cancer and heart disease. That's just what I call expected. But it's so different when you hear about a loved one being diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. It's called the long goodbye for a reason. I know your situation was different. I know from my own personal experience that this can be drawn out, but it is such a different diagnosis in that way, and a very emotional one, because it's not just the individual who's diagnosed who goes through it, it's the entire family as well.
Yeah, and you feel like you lose your loved one over and over again as time goes by. Little things that they used to do that they can no longer do. And you're absolutely right. It's one of those diseases that I would even argue impacts the family unit almost more than the person actually dealing with the disease. And so that was really the premise of this story. So tonight, in the story you'll see at 10, I wanted to focus a little bit on my experience, but I wanted it to be bigger than that. We're not used to being the story, right?
Right. So we're used to telling other people's stories and telling our own story,
So
but I think that's why it is so important. And for people who don't know you, you're such a humble and gracious man who never really thinks about himself as much, but this is not what this is about. This is about you bringing attention to a disease that's really quietly impacting so many people. I have to ask you, did your family recognize what was happening with your mother early on? Did you know she has some memory issues, maybe there's some dementia or Alzheimer's at play?
Looking back, we wondered when did she actually have this disease? When did it start? Because you look back and you think about a certain moment, certain things. She'd be more forgetful. She'd misplace her keys. She'd get confused a little bit when she was driving. Little things like that you don't really think of. I mean, that sort of started when my mom was in her late 60s, and it's a little young for that sort of thing to be picking up, but you chalk it off to, she's getting older, it's age, and that in my story I found that's a big problem in the Latino and minority communities. We assume that it's, hey, we're just getting
part
old.
Of aging.
Yeah, it's part of aging, there's nothing wrong, so they don't go to doctors. We probably avoided taking my mom to see a doctor for those types of symptoms for a little longer than we should have, and it was probably going on. But it's important, and I hope people get that from this story, to not overlook those signs. And in our communities, the Latino community, the African American community, that's a huge problem in accessing care. We wait too long.
It's just abuelita getting a little senile, that's it, she's getting older. Or, in some cases, because there's now early onset Alzheimer's, so we are looking at people being younger. I mean, I would consider your mother's age having been relatively young, but we are seeing it, and some people chalk it up to, they're just stressed or so much on their mind, right? You hear that as well too, but don't take those signs and signals for granted when you hear that as well.
In the story tonight, I wanted to say I interview a young mother now who lost her grandmother to Alzheimer's several years ago. 2009, she passed away. And you talk about how everybody's story is different. That's her on the screen now. Her name is Marina Castillo. She lost her grandmother, Lupita, after 12 years with the disease. So their road was a lot longer. So we talked to them tonight about what their journey was like and how she's coped with the loss of a woman who was sort of like her second mother. And she'll talk about how, as you mentioned, this is a disease that impacts the entire family. In Latino cultures especially, the family rallies around brothers, sisters, husband, wives. They sort of team up and take it as a personal responsibility to take care of their loved one. And that over time is very difficult and psychologically rough on the family. So we'll hear her talk about that as well.
Absolutely. And everyone's still human and processes and deals with it differently too. Sometimes you have family members who can be in a bit of denial, especially early on, saying what it is, what it's not. Also those loved ones who have an idea of what caregiving looks like from each family member, who's doing more, who's doing less. So it definitely presents its stressors on the entire family. I think what's so tough with this diagnosis too is, Marcelino, when a family does learn that their loved one's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, there is no cure.
That's the most frustrating part. It's emotional for me to even talk about, because I think back to all the doctor's appointments because of the language barrier. My mom spoke English, but not perfect English, so I took it upon myself to take her to the doctor. So I took her to all these doctor's visits and with her Alzheimer's doctor, and really it was so frustrating going every time, because they sort of look at you and they do their best. They give you medication to sort of slow it down, but there's really nothing more that they can do. There is no cure. You just watch it progress and advance, and that's emotionally tough. That's one of the hardest parts of this disease.
I think every time you go to the doctor, it's more of what stage they're in.
Yes.
We're still in this stage, so that's promising that it has not progressed. But ultimately, for now and where we are with the world of medicine and Alzheimer's, is that there is no cure, and eventually, ultimately, sadly enough, that death is the end.
And it's coming, right? Psychologically, that's tough. You know there's no cure. You know things are going to get worse eventually, and you sort of live with that as a family and as a caregiver, watching your loved one go through that. Bigger picture for our story tonight is an interview I've done with researchers, because they are desperately trying to find out find a cure for Alzheimer's. But really, the premise of the story tonight as well is that after learning about, what had happened to my mom and experiencing that pain, I started doing research. When you're in the middle of taking care of your loved one, you're in the middle of grief, you really aren't looking at studies and research. You don't pay attention to that. But
you're so busy caregiving.
Yes, you're so busy caregiving. But as I found in my reporting, Latinos are overwhelmingly more susceptible and at risk for Alzheimer's. And the scary thing, as a Latino, is we don't know why. Mm-hmm. Doctors and researchers have no idea why. What is it about the Latino community that makes them more susceptible to this disease? So we spoke to a doctor tonight, a researcher here in Houston at the University of Houston, and I think we have a soundbite from him. So let's listen to what he has to say about the problem.
Folks that are doing this kind of work are seeing it as a public health crisis. By the year 2060, we're expecting about a 9-fold increase in Hispanic individuals with Alzheimer's disease. That's just looking at Hispanic American and Latin American individuals. It's a costly disease. It's the numbers are increasing, and here in Houston, with 40% of the population identifying as Hispanic, we're going to see these numbers continue to rise locally, and not just nationally, but also locally.
So ninefold increase. When you think about that, that's a major problem. And you heard him describe it, which sort of caught me off guard in that interview. He describes it, and researchers consider it a public health crisis, a looming public health crisis. The Hispanic population in the United States is only getting larger. Here in Texas, really where the epicenter of what's happening with Alzheimer's. In the piece, you'll also hear us talk about where it's worse. And Houston has it pretty bad, but in the Rio Grande Valley, for example, it's really the absolute epicenter of what's happening. That's a community that's 90% Hispanic, and the Alzheimer's rates there, for some reason, if you're Hispanic, 65 and older in the Rio Grande Valley, you are twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's than any other part in the country. It has the highest Alzheimer's rates in the country.
That's why we need that research, because we still don't know why these communities are being impacted so greatly. Is there a cultural barrier, did he say, to getting people to participate in the research as well?
Absolutely. It's very taboo in the Hispanic community. In the piece tonight, you'll hear me talk about what kept my mother and us really as a family, not just my mom, from choosing to enroll her in a study, myself choosing to enroll in a study. It's very taboo for the Latino community. Language is a problem. A lot of these studies, the ones here in Houston are phenomenal. They have that bilingual aspect to them, but many studies out there still are just English only. That's a barrier for folks.
Absolutely.
And also access to care financially. It can be very expensive to get the care, to find out where to turn for these studies. That can be difficult.
And I know culturally there's a lot of pride there too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So there's the fear of exposing this vulnerable individual, right, who traditionally before this diagnosis was a person very prideful within themselves, within their family and their community too.
Yeah, that was very difficult for my mom and my dad, something they navigated. My mom was a very proud woman, a woman who did everything on her own, a great mom to me and my brother. And you see them, what's hard is you see them struggle with losing abilities and sort of acknowledging that they're declining, and you watch that happen in real time, and it's almost more painful to us to watch
Absolutely.
what's happening to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we want to take away that stigma there and let people know that they need to take part in this research. They need to educate themselves as well too, right? It's better knowing going in than learning as going through the process too.
What's incredibly frustrating, and the point of this story as well, to hopefully encourage people to sign up for studies, is we found out that Hispanics are more at risk for this disease. The numbers tell us they're going to be exponential in the next 20, 30 years. That's going to pose a financial burden on many families. It's going to pose a financial burden for the country dealing with the people that have Alzheimer's. Yet we don't know why that's happening, and the people that are getting it the most aren't participating in the studies that can get us answers. So even now, treatments that are being developed, they're being developed for white patients that participate in these studies. We don't know how a lot of these treatments actually work on minority populations, because minority populations aren't really participating in the numbers that they should in these studies, and that needs to change.
I hope people are motivated by hearing your words and watching your story tonight. In the meantime, for people who are going through this, are there bilingual resources available?
Absolutely. I wish I had known they were around when I was going through it with my mom. But there are. The biggest resource nationally and here in Houston, of course, is the Alzheimer's Association. They have a Houston, Southeast Texas chapter. They're right off the South Loop, the North Loop, I believe. So on my Facebook page and on the story tonight, I have their information. There's a 24/7 hotline that I had no idea about that you can call 24/7 for if you're having problems caregiving, if your
Absolutely.
Loved one is violent.
If you just need someone to talk to.
Yeah, if you need
well.
someone to talk to as a caregiver, that's both to help the patient and the caregivers, because like we said, it impacts the whole family unit and structure. So there's plenty of resources, and we'll dive into those more tonight at 10.
A reminder too, next month is Alzheimer's
Yes.
Awareness Month. Hopeful to find a cure for all families' sake. Marcelino, again, thank you so very much for sharing your story and telling us more about your mother. We know she was a wonderful woman, and she'd be so proud for you advocating right now in order to help others. Thank you so very much.
Hope it helps.
A reminder, see the full story and learn more tonight on KHOU 11 News at 10. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.